thank you so much for joining today. Sorry we're starting a little bit late. One of our speakers, Dan Haslam, is having a few technical difficulties. So Leah and I are going to kick off. Again, thank you all for joining. Leah, hi, did you want to introduce yourself to the group?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for having me, Holly, and obviously looking forward to speaking with Dan in a second. So Leah Boxell, I'm the CEO of Enablists. We are a PMO and project consultancy, which is a business I built off the back of my career in change and transformation. So I've worked for over 16 years, I won't tell you quite how many years it's been, in change and transformation, working for large companies like Capita, so dealing with acquisitions and mergers and integrating the businesses into Capita. Worked for a number of utility companies, SSE, National Grid, and I also had the privilege of working for NHS professionals, where I was chief of staff but also ran their silver command to the pandemic response. And it was that really that I suppose inspired me to build my own business to help more companies to be able to navigate change and get through these things effectively. So I'm quite different in my approach. It's about real, honest and authentic ways of change, and not tying yourself up in red tape and bureaucracy, and actually making sure that you deliver. And I'm also the first person to tell you to stop a project if you're compromising on anything with regards to your outcomes or what it is that you're trying to achieve. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. So looking forward to getting into this.
That's great. Thank you so much, Leah. So over the next 40 minutes or so, we will focus on how organisations, including recruitment businesses, can maximise the opportunities presented by a slower economy to internally review their systems, processes, to gain efficiency and match fit in an increasingly competitive market. We will focus on how you go about forming the right approach for your organisation's needs and what strategies you need to embed these changes in your organisation, and how you can take a strategic approach to choosing the right supplier to deliver the changes you want to make. We expect there to be lots of questions, so please send them via the Q&A button or the chat. I'll be monitoring them both throughout, and we will leave about 20 minutes or so at the end just to address those questions. So we've come out of order a little bit. We're joined by Enablists. Leah today is in a fantastic introduction. I'm actually Holly. I'm the head of marketing here at Giant Group, and Dan Haslam, our expert, will be joining us as soon as he can get on. The areas that we're going to include today are you clear on what process and the areas you want to improve? Do you clearly know what problem you're trying to solve? So we're going to discuss a little bit about that. What to think about when you go into market, choosing the right suppliers and any operational changes, big decisions to make. How do you go about making those decisions? What are your barriers to success? And then future-proofing, AI, the buzzword at the moment. How are we all using AI to ensure, that we can continue to be efficient and do the best we can? So, Leah, over to you. How did you want to kick this off? What's the why? What's the informed why?
Yeah, so I think the biggest things when organisations are trying to change is find that why. And I've talked about this for so many hours to Dan, especially, but it's what's the why? What is it that you're trying to achieve and what your non-negotiable? So, and this is what ties me back to the bit around actually whether you need to stop the project, because if your why is compromised, please don't just spend the money because you're already partway through spending that money. Cut your losses and learn quickly, and revert. But I think we need to start taking that what's the why a little bit further to how have you informed your why? What data has gone into what it is that you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to future proof? And I think we need to be so aware that things are moving at such a pace now in the world and in business, society and everything. I think things move so quickly, and I think the pandemic really opened our mind up to that. But how can we future proof and how can we make sure that we're informed around what's coming on? And then I think the whole thing around customer value. So I think typically we're a lot less patient, but we're also a lot more demanding as people. I expect to be able to get something at my door tomorrow if I need to buy it, because that's the reality of what we've become used to. And so I think we need to seriously consider what do our customers value, because I think there is so much choice and there are so many other alternatives that people can go for. So they will go out for them if they can. So I think you need to constantly be thinking about that. And then to really set yourself up for success around change programs and what it is you're trying to do, you need to make sure that you've got a holistic view over what it is that you're doing, so that you can actually see how it all ties in together. And again, this will tell you whether part of what your outcomes that you're trying to achieve are going to be compromised if you've got that holistic view. So they would be some kind of key things that I would say to start with.
Great, thanks so much, Leah. And we do have Dan now. So Dan, I will hand over to you guys and I'll be here if anyone needs anything. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Well done, Holly. There's nothing like a Windows update a minute out from when a webinar starts to brighten up your lunchtime. So well done, Holly, for holding the fort. And thanks, Leah, for your first answer. Yeah, sorry, everybody. My name's Dan. I'm Group Sales Director here at Giant, and I should be the host for today's session. And we'll get going from here on in. So, Leah, that was super interested in terms of the why, but I think what we're keen to try and do is just, in your experience, understand what's the best way for an organization to identify which processes are holding them back and where they should look to focus.
Yeah, there's one main answer for this, and it's going to be the data. And it's often the stuff that we grapple with the most because we don't necessarily have the clean data that we need, but the data will tell you where your inefficiencies lie. That coupled with your people, if you go and speak to your people, they'll be able to tell you what's working and what's not. And the best example of that is the NHS. You know, it's in the press all of the time at the moment about how it needs to be fixed and how things can change and how we can improve it. If you go into those frontline hospital trusts and you go and speak to the frontline staff, they know how to fix the problems, but that needs to be communicated, and they need to be able to speak to the people that are kind of trying to be the people to solve it. And I think so data and your people is where you'll find the inefficiencies, and that they'll be able to help you come up with the solutions as well. As I say, I speak to people in the NHS quite a lot. So many of those staff know how to fix some of the issues that we've got, but they're not empowered to be able to do that. So yeah, I think those would be my two key things.
Yeah, data is such a problem for most organizations. We certainly see it from Giant's side when we're looking at doing integrations with businesses. 9 times out of 10, the data quality is not great. Yeah. Businesses work really hard to try and manage that at the front end, but it's tricky. And sometimes you've got to speak to the front end staff to actually understand the interpretation of the data, because 100%. You know, a field may say, you know, one thing, but they could be using it for something completely different. So even when you've got a good data set, it still needs sort of interpretation.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's another point here as well around that we wanted to explore today, around where companies think they understand what the challenge is, but sometimes they're not. There's some warning signs, let's say, that actually a business thinks it knows its own problem, but it actually doesn't. I'm sure you've probably seen that a couple of times. So what in your experience does that look like?
Yeah, so I think it comes back to the people thing as well. I think don't just assume as a leadership team you know everything, would be my number one. Actually spend time listening and speaking to people, but the listen bit is really, really critical. Don't just take the time to go and speak to them on all hands things. Actually hear from them what's going on within the business, how they're finding things, how their customer interactions are going, what's the kind of mood music. And I think that for me is really, really critical. And I think, you know, I've worked for some incredible people over the years. One of the best person would openly say, I don't know everything, but that's why I hire people around me to be able to help me shape the answers and help me build the future. And that person will know who they are. And I think that is so important, is that don't think just as a leadership team that you are the ones that have got all of the answers. Speak to your people and understand what's going on from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. That makes sense. But often it's amazing how many projects can get underway without having the right stakeholders involved to actually understand what's going on at ground level. You know, maybe the CEO's got a really clear vision that they know that this is the direction of travel, but actually they're trying to tackle the wrong issue because they've not engaged with the right people. But you've brought those people in for their expertise, so why not have them in the room? Otherwise, you're going to be wasting a lot of time as you explore that project.
I worked with a company before where they had so many projects going on, but what they hadn't realised until we started to surface it was that the people that were on the receiving end of the projects was all of the same team. the exact same group of people that were at the receiving end of all of these projects. And when you went and spoke to them, they're like, it's great that we're trying to do all of this. We're trying to bring in new processes. We're trying to bring in new technology. But actually, I've got a day job to do as well. And that's not being factored in. So I'm trying to do my job because I've got KPIs to hit and I've got things that I need to deliver to be able to be on my performance. But I'm also getting this barrage of just things that I need to take on that take time to learn. And so that's why it is so important that you have that kind of mood music through your entire organisation, so you understand the impact of that.
Yeah, and I suppose also there's a bit of a groupthink risk there as well, isn't it? If it's always the same people in that project delivery room looking at each problem, actually bringing some fresh blood, so to speak, or someone who's in the trenches into that environment takes some pressure off those other people, but it also adds a slightly different dynamic in there as well. Probably, them looking at it from a slightly different angle, which is always a positive thing when you're looking at project management. Yeah. In your experience then, in terms of drilling down specifically into recruitment businesses, where do they sort of typically lack visibility or clarity when they're looking at their own operational process?
Yeah, I think the big subject we're talking about in the recruitment side of things, and I hear it in a lot of the networking events that you and I go to, Dan, CRM systems. If used correctly, a CRM will provide you all the visibility across your teams. But the biggest problem that we're having is people either don't have the right CRM technology that allows them to have that visibility, or that they've put the CRM in and actually they're struggling with the adoption piece. And that's one of the challenges that you've got to get. So yeah, I think, there's gaps in communication. There'll be siloed systems. There's going to be inefficiency in processes. But I think getting that whole kind of holistic view through that CRM and getting that transparency between what's going on in the back office versus the front office, and then actually what is the client journey, is so important. I had a conversation actually recently with somebody who was struggling to get adoption onto their CRM, and it quite closely linked to that the team were assuming that they were pushing the CRM because they wanted people to understand people's productivity a little bit more, because there was this whole, should we bring the team back into the office, or actually are they productive enough at home? And if you're in the recruitment side of things and actually you are enjoying the flexibility that hybrid working brings to you, because let's be honest, it is very good for that. If you've got any kind of for everybody actually, if you've got caring needs or any number of issues, flexibility is great for you. Adopt into a CRM and creating that visibility is only going to help that argument. So I think getting on board with some of those things is going to be so important. But yeah, I would say the CRM piece is if done right, is the bit that works really well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've worked in multiple sales organizations over my career, and it's always an issue trying to get front office, let's call it, and sales individuals to put data into systems. I'm probably culpable putting my hand up there as well, because you just want to cut through the noise, so to speak, and get what needs to be done to get the output that you need. But that data is absolutely critical. So trying to get everyone to fill the fields out and have some, and everyone to fill it out in the same way, it's just so tricky. And I've no real answer to how you solve that challenge. It's about communicating how important it is and actually feeding back, maybe, look, if you can get this data set right, that enables our marketing department or the other operational parts of the business to really help deliver what you want and bring more, sales opportunities into the organization. These are the angles you try and lean into.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember in recruitment, especially, you're using this. A lot of recruitment businesses putting their entire business on the CRM now, aren't they? They're using it for everything, from the kind of cradle to grave aspect. I think the thing to remember is, coming back to my earlier point, as customers, we are so much less tolerable of a bad experience. So actually you have to think about it from that perspective. It's not just about your performance and people seeing what you're doing and all of that sort of stuff. It's about actually, as a customer, whether it be I'm hiring somebody or actually I'm a candidate that's looking for a job, I want a seamless experience. I don't want it to be difficult. I don't want people not to know where I'm at. I want it to be able to take me through that process as swiftly as possible. And actually, if the teams aren't using that, that's not going to happen. It's going to be a rubbish user experience. So I think it's about remembering that, which is at the core of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, there's so many publicly available feedback forums for people to slate your business these days that it definitely, that's one of the ways it keeps us honest in terms of information. Just one thing I would say to the audience, please do submit questions as we go through today's session. You've got a Q&A function at the top in the tool ribbon. So if you've got questions you want to pose to Leah, if you're wrestling with projects at the moment and you want some advice, then please do put those questions in and we'll make sure that we come back round to those at the end of the session. Great. So if we move on then, so if we're clear then on the sort of outcomes that people are looking to achieve then, Leah, what sort of options are available to businesses to actually deliver that change that they desire?
So I'd say there's no one rule for this. It needs to be very much tailored to your business. So, and it will depend on what it is that you're trying to do. Are you trying to outsource? Are you going to go and buy some technology? Are you doing a whole scale change from kind of the end-to-end processes that you're looking for? And then I think it's about finding a methodology that works for you. But also, again, you don't need to take methodologies and approaches as they are. You can tailor them and adapt them as you need to. So one of the biggest things we had when we worked on the pandemic stuff, as you know, we did the 10,000 test and trace clinicians, rapid response, the vaccination programs, things like that. We had governance in place. We had to know, and we had to report daily on what we were doing on some of those programs. So we had to know that they were going to achieve it. But what we didn't do was tie ourselves up in knots and processes and things like that were just going to stop us from delivering. So I think it is about making sure that you tailor that approach. And if anyone's unsure on that, just reach out to me, because I can talk about this subject all day long. And I see it all of the time. People put in massive processes, 100-page documents telling you how to do some of this sort of stuff. And that's just not what reality is going to allow. That is going to stop delivering. It will stifle your teams as well. So yeah, it doesn't need to be that.
Yeah, it's that you're touching on, I suppose, the cultural fit, aren't you? So not only are you thinking about the technical solution to deliver an outcome, but actually it's also making sure that the culturally that fits in with the way that the teams work and how we operate. And that obviously that changes dramatically from business to business. So that'll have a flavour on how you implement, how you monitor, but also what solution you're picking the first time. And of course, you've got other things like at a big high level, you can have companies looking at acquisition as a way of trying to drive fast change by buying a business that already delivers X, Y, and Z. And that brings with it a whole host of other cultural challenges as well. But maybe that's acquisitions are certainly a topic for another day. Okay, so if we've got that clear understanding of that problem then that we want to address and how we're going to tackle it, then how do you go to market and assess what that appropriate solution is? You've mentioned there's a few options there, you know, buy, build, is obviously a potential option, but how do you assess what the appropriate solutions are to solve that particular requirement, Leah?
Yeah, so you need to know your outcome and then be really clear on what your requirements are and what are your non-negotiables. Because if you don't know your non-negotiables, you can't go out to market with anything, because that's where you're then going to invest money and it's going to come back to bite you because you're going to invest it in the wrong thing. I think be really clear on what those non-negotiables are, and then also do your research, do thorough research. When you're going out to market, I always suggest to any of our customers that they do market research before going into an RFP. So go out and see who's out there, what is technology doing in that space, have a bit of an understanding how it's going to evolve over the next few years, but also understand what are the user experiences that your customers are expecting, how is that likely to evolve. I always talk, and I know we talk about this analogy all the time, Blockbuster and Netflix. Don't become the next Blockbuster. Look at what that is going to do, and then once you're there, you can then look at the case studies, references, and put the suppliers through the mill a little bit, through the process. I'm sure all of the people on this call get put through that, but for some reason, I think as other people, we don't necessarily do it, but do it. I get given a tough time on any recruitment RFP process, but I don't think everybody does. But yeah, do make that process tough so that the kind of good ones do come through and survive.
No, I think that's a great observation. I think we're all familiar with, RFPs coming through regularly from customers asking for loads of information, and then when we come round to looking at, trying to solve a problem and acquiring a solution, it's like, right, let's just do a quick analysis and bang, let's make some fast decisions. And you're like, hang on a minute, what's good for the goose and everything else,
Yeah.
And also just on references as well, when you're looking at embracing a new supplier and you're doing some research, the ability to be able to speak to some of their customers. I do wonder, because we get asked for references a lot of times, I do wonder how often they're actually followed up upon and how often those conversations take place. But I'm sure there's some great intelligence that you can get about a supplier, and not just getting behind the things that are on the website and the product specifics, but actually how it feels to engage with that business as well, because there's always a feeling that goes with the product delivery as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's also, so I think there's a little bit of people are skeptical about the references that are lined up, because obviously I think there's a bit of expectation that only be the positive people. A lot of people put who they work with on their websites in their material. Go and see where those people are. If you're investing large amounts of money, it would be worth the couple of hours out of your diary if they're going to a network event to go and have a conversation that says, oh, I see that you use Giant, or I see you use Enablists. How does that go? How does that feel? That's more of a natural conversation. I also think we did this with one of our customers recently, actually. Give the supplier skin in the game. So what we did with them was we agreed, subject to a successful pilot, that they would win the full contract. And there was a break clause at the end of that pilot that if that wasn't successful, that the whole contract, the rest of the contract could be thing. There were some suppliers that said, we're not going to sign up for that. Okay, that's fine. That gives us a little bit more of an indication about how you feel about the confidence of your ability to be able to deliver a pilot. But that flushed out quite a lot as well, which was quite a good concept. So I think just be as tough on people through a recruitment, a procurement process as people would be with you. And I think that would be my one big thing.
Yeah, no, good advice as well on that try before you buy fully sort of approach. But like you say, that won't necessarily work for every supplier or service. It depends on what that upfront investment is, I suppose.
Yeah.
And in your experience then, because obviously you've advised numerous organisations on these sorts of operations, what have you seen being the sort of biggest mistakes that organisations have made when they've selected a supplier?
Don't just fall for the sales pitch.
Don't say that. That's my job in the business. Group sales director.
Dig deeper. Get to know them. So for me, it's not. So a lot of this can be technology, and some of it will be services. But for me, what are they like to work with? What are they going to be like? Because it's not when everything's going well that's going to matter. It's when things are not going well. That's going to be the test of the relationship and what you've bought into. So I think you need to dig deep on that. And you need to understand how they are going to react in some of those things. So do your research, put them through their paces a little bit, challenge them, and you will start to see those behaviours because of the way that we work through our procurement processes with our customers. Some people self-select themselves out because they're like, do you know what, this is just not going to be the right kind of thing for us, and that's fine. We'd rather have those conversations up front than sign into a contract and then find that that's the case. So I think it's not just the sales pitch and process. Find out what's actually going on. I think look at the stories, do your own research, find out who they're working with. If you can, find a networking event where that person is, that you can have that kind of conversation to go, how is it actually going? How do you find it? All of those sorts of things, I think, will just inform you really nicely.
Yeah, I think that's an important point on that sort of qualifying out process. That's good news for the supplier as well as your organisation, because the supplier doesn't want to invest tons and tons of time in a sales process that might not necessarily be a good fit. So I think it's always should be viewed as a positive outcome if you've qualified someone out, because it's saving both organisations time.
Reputationally as well, if it doesn't work, it's not great for the supplier because that's a disgruntled person, isn't it? So that's then potentially going to go and say that to the 5 people that they know. So you're better off finding whether you're a match to work with or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, so aside from any of the technical points and obviously cost, are there any other particular criteria that businesses should be using to evaluate suppliers that you want to flag to the audience?
Yeah, so I would say understanding the alignment between long-term goals So where are they looking to go? Where are you looking to go? And how does that fit? So I'm sure that most of the people that are investing time on this rainy Thursday lunchtime are probably wanting to make sure that they stay abreast of what's happening in the market and the industry. And as I say, it's so quick to become, it can be so easily, you can become the next blockbuster. Things are moving at such a rate at the moment. So I think making sure that alignment, the partnership thing is big for me. How is that going to stand when things go wrong? Because that will be the time that the challenges are on. Are you in it together, or is it going to be an us versus them situation? Is going to be so important. And then I think how they're supporting innovation. So, I've seen so many products over my time in change where a couple of years ago I would have massively discounted something because it was a million miles from any of its competitors. Some of them have just come on leaps and bounds, and it's amazing because they've obviously realised that they are going to get left behind, and they've put the time and they've put the effort into it. And when you have the conversation with them now, they're going, we're not going to be in that position again. We're not going to be in the position where we're behind the curve with everything. So I think making sure that you're going with those suppliers that are kind of are in that mindset, so that you'll be constantly kind of staying in front of what it is that the technology space is doing.
A great point. And again, I think that goes back to the value that an RFP or an RFI process has the other way around, giving that feedback back to a supplier as to where the gaps were means that they can factor that into they can factor that into the product journey, and they'll either react to it or they won't. And I think you're quite right. Where a business is today is going to be dramatically different to where it is in 12 or 18 months time. So always good to leave the door open so that you can reassess. I mean, we've touched on a few points though, and certainly this cultural fit piece is coming up now, which I think, would you say, how important is that as a factor versus the sort of technical aspects of a product? How important is that cultural fit when you're looking at choosing a supplier? Because I always get the sense that too often not enough time spent on looking at that, and it's always focused on often cost and absolute technical requirements. But how important is that, do you think?
The most important thing. So I always say technology is the enabler, but technology is only as good if it's used and it implements well. So if the person you're working with does not understand your organization, the implementation is going to be hard and difficult. It's going to have bumps, it's going to be challenging. And then the problem is, the more you have that, the more likely you are to affect your user adoption the other end. Because they're all of the people that are skeptical or don't necessarily want to get on board with the change are going to go, we told you this was going to happen, this was going to go wrong. So you're kind of creating the barrier both ends on that side of things. And as I say, if you can find a way of working with somebody that's in it with you, when you do hit those challenges, if it is about actually this is a partnership and we're here to solve it, you'll work to get collectively together to solve those things. Nothing will ever go perfectly, nothing will ever go plain sailing, because there's a whole host of things involved in change. There's people, the technology doesn't work. Your example, Dan, today was the prime example. It doesn't always do what it needs to do when you need it to. So it's how we react in those moments. And obviously Holly and I were like, that's fine, we're just going to dial into the call and we'll wait for Dan to join us. But had we not had that cultural fit and that relationship, then that could have been a bit of a fraught, and then we would have had some disappointed people on this call today. So yeah, it's everything in my eyes.
No, we're very grateful for that live example that I gave you at the beginning of the call, but let's hope we'll never repeat it. We'll never repeat it again. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, I don't think any organisation always gets it right when they're looking at engaging with new suppliers. So I think we've all had experience of buying something that didn't quite match up to the sort of sales pitch. So are there any particular red flags that you'd signpost to the audience today to sort of indicate when you might have picked the wrong supplier?
Yeah, the first one, which has only happened a handful of times, but it has actually happened, is when people refuse to do a demo. They refuse to show you any of their products, but want you to sign a £1 million paycheck for a contract. So I think that would be the thing, that there must be something that they can show you that would be. So that would be my first one. I think unrealistic timelines. It's great and very lovely when someone tells us they can do something for us next week. Is it actually going to be the case? So I think being realistic, most of people will have experienced some kind of change or will understand actually the lift and shift that is involved with some of this stuff. You've got to understand your processes, you've got to create some efficiencies, you've got to build technology, you've got to test it, you've got to get people on board. That isn't going to happen over a couple of weeks. So and I think if they're giving you those unrealistic timelines, especially if they're saying it's on time and materials with an unrealistic timeline, because that means that there's an intention that will run longer. So I think those are some things. Lack of transparency. So just not necessarily being completely open. And I think the other thing is there are some people out there that won't offer post-implementation support. I'd ask myself why. So I would expect if I'm spending a significant amount of money with a supplier that they would be around to make sure that we have got that post-implementation support, and that there'll be the whole change adoption piece that the businesses and the companies that are going through the change are on the hook for. But there will be some stuff that will be related to the system or the service that you're looking. So if that post-implementation support isn't there, I'd also question that.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Good, absolute good shout. And I think there's some useful takeaways for people to keep an eye on as they're going through that sales process. So now let's imagine that we're coming to the end of that and we're now moving into sort of contract arrangements. What does everyone need to be aware of in terms of the approach there around contract?
Yes, other than the point I made earlier around thinking about whether you can do a pilot, which I think I would ask most people to consider. I think you've got exit clauses, so making sure that they're really clear, really defined, and work both ways. Performance metrics. So you will have been sold something along the line that says, in doing this, we expect the return on investment to be this. Tie some of those performance metrics into your contract so that your supplier has skin in the game as well. So that there'll be some things that you're expecting there. And being really, really clear on what it is that you're getting from the implementation and then the support and the training, because you can get super users and all of those sorts of great things, but you are going to have a reliance on the supplier that you're working with. So making sure that you really understand all of that and how that looks. But that implementation, what does that support look like? Because if that's the bit that you're going to lose your audience if you can't get that bit right, because they'll just switch off. And it won't necessarily be just your internal teams. I've heard of scenarios where people have rolled a CRM technology out to a client as a first phase rollout and it went horribly wrong. The reputation and impact of that client being on that first experience is going to be so hard to recover from. So that implementation support is really critical.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think we'll come back round to it later when we're talking about longer term projects and people getting fatigued. Like if the first experience is not great, then the supplier's on the back foot from the start there, and that can sometimes lead to an inevitable conclusion. So let's move on to our next topic then. So we've kind of assessed what the problem is. We've thought through that strategically. We want to look at making a change. We've looked at the market. We've selected an appropriate supplier that we've onboarded. Now let's sort of discuss how we now embed that change into the organization, which is often can be as tricky as implementation in the first place. So how do you ensure that those new processes stick rather than sort of being abandoned immediately after that implementation phase?
So this is my favorite part of this whole subject, is the people. Change is nothing without people. As I say, I go back to my thing, technology is the enabler, but you still need people at the helm to be able to do that. So when I talked earlier about knowing your why and the outcome, I think it's as important to know what you're doing and what that means to your people. I talk a little bit about this as a bit of an analogy of this. So our supermarkets, as we know, I've got a couple near me that have gone completely self-service. So you now can't go through a till with a person, you have to go and do the checkout, and it annoys the hell out of me because there's always problems and I'm always waiting for somebody to come and help me. There was a whole workforce of people that applied to go and work in a supermarket and work on a checkout because maybe they're not very mobile. and they're able to sit. Maybe they're lonely and actually they like the interactions with people. When I do go to checkouts and there's people, they're always so chatty and lovely. You have great conversations of what you're buying, or is it a party, what you're doing at the weekend, all of that sort of stuff. We've now just taken those roles away from those people and said, right, now those people are going to go through those self-service checkouts, and now you're going to go and stack shelves. What have we done to that person who maybe has mobility issues or can't stand on their feet or can't lift and do all of the things associated with stacking shelves? We've also just taken away the massive impact of the people, the interactions with people. We've fundamentally changed that person's job, but not realised it. And then we'll go, but they're against what we're trying to do because we're trying to create efficiencies by giving people self-service checkouts. They're not against what you're trying to do. You fundamentally change their job and it's not what they signed up for. And I think that at the crux of a lot of things is understanding that people's jobs are going to change. The way we work is going to change. AI is going to come in and it's going to change that. There are a whole host of other things, but we need to understand, why are our people working for us? There will be some people that will just be turning up to be paid a paycheck and go home and that's what they are. But there'll be a whole host of people that are there for something else. It might be the people, it might be the greater cause, it might be that's what suits them in their family life or their environment around them. So I think really getting to the bottom of that. And I think we're sometimes lazy because we don't think about that. It's easier to just go, well, people aren't getting on board. Have you actually asked why? Have you actually understood? Have you listened and have you heard what they're saying to you? And then how do you work through that? I think the other thing is, it's not a one and done. Change needs constant reinforcement. You need to be communicate. So Dan, I know we've spoken a lot about when I did the Silver Command things, we were communicating 3 times a week around what we were doing. And now that was extreme, and it was needed because of the volume of work that we were putting through our people. But communicate, and I say, if you don't communicate, people will make up their own narrative. And usually by default, it's more negative because it's easier to assume it's going to be a bad thing rather than it's going to be a positive thing. So you have to communicate. And I think not thinking that once the implementation is done, that it's done and it's dusted. You need to go through continuous improvement. You need to go through continuous learning, and the leadership have a constant role in this, that it constantly evolves, and we empower our people to tell us how it's going, how is it working on the front line of what their jobs are, what tweaks could be made, what the customer's saying, how can we do things differently. So yeah, I'd kind of say they would be my key kind of components.
Yeah, no, super interesting. I think as a leadership team, when you're making changes, especially fundamental ones like like your analogy there that you've used on the supermarkets, you must expect there's going to be some internal resistance to those changes and start trying to think through how to overcome it. Are there any particular key points that you'd flag there to people as to how they can sort of challenge that internal resistance and sort of take people with you?
Yeah, so I think, as I say, get to the bottom of the resistance. Some people it will be the job doesn't suit them. Some people will be they don't agree that actually the change is going to deliver the ROI. They I put into my naysayers category. So I say bring them in, put them on the project team, give them a clearly defined role and help them shape you, because they're going to be the people that are going to tell you what's going to go wrong before the project team realise. There'll be some people that they're scared, they don't understand. I went to a event a couple of months ago where they were trying to get their recruiters to use LinkedIn far more, and they had massive resistance from it. And one of the ladies who was responsible for kind of driving this engagement went and spoke to one of the people that was resistant, and it was quite a young chap in the team, and he was just like, I just don't understand it. I just don't understand how to do it. She spent a couple of hours with him, took him through the process, and he absolutely excelled. His performance went through the roof. He became the biggest ambassador for using LinkedIn because actually he see it, but she took the time to understand what his resistance was. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that don't understand that it's just one thing. Like, everybody will have a slightly different angle on it. Sometimes it's fear. When I worked for Capita and we were doing the acquisitions, and what I used to do was I would help integrate the IT into the Capita systems, because that's how they would get the efficiencies. I'm not a techie, as you know, Dan, but I would deal with the business change side of things. Actually, quite often what was behind that was they're being asked to use a different computer, they're being asked to log into different systems, but actually nobody said your job's safe. And actually, so that's where some of the resistance was coming, was that there was a fear, actually, is all of this happening because you're going to sack me next week, and I'm going to have this impact on my family and my home life. So I think you have to talk to people, you have to understand what is really driving that resistance, and get to the bottom of it, and then share what you're doing, share some of the scenarios, and the naysayers, that's the best example. So some people will say it's not going to work because they need to see that it could work, and they might come through that journey. Some people will say it's not going to work because actually that's not the way in which they want to work. And I think we're going to have some of that come through with the AI stuff, Dan. All of a sudden, I think we're going to put more focus on relationships, nurturing, speaking to people, and all of that sort of stuff. And actually, that's not going to suit some people. Some people couldn't think of anything worse than having to call somebody, or have a contact or relationship with somebody. So I think we need to think about what those scenarios are behind what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's human nature, isn't it, for people to think the worst whenever there's a change. You'll naturally think, okay, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And you've just got to talk people through it. And often the thing that you think they might be fearing might not actually be that. So it's about this communication point. And I really like the example that you took there of someone who was not an advocate or a naysayer, as you say, and then you might, turning that back round probably became the biggest advocate for the process. But all that happened because someone sat down and spent some time with the person and talked it through, which you can't be. Just a quick reminder to everyone, we're just going to be moving into the last topic shortly, so if you've got any questions for Leah, please do drop them in and we can make sure we push them out at the end of the session. And we touched on this earlier on, Leah, where we mentioned around change fatigue. Now, I've heard a few articles online that have talked about long-term projects and this thing of change fatigue. Is it a real thing? And if so, then how would you suggest that companies can manage that?
Yeah, it is a real thing. And it comes back to that scenario I gave you earlier on, where the company I was working for, they were just changing so much for the individual who was in a front line in that role. And it was just too much. I think sometimes we can be impatient in business. We want to do everything tomorrow. And actually, we're keen to rush things. I think we need to understand and recognise the pace that change our people, but our customers can also go through as well. And I think sometimes do we always think at both those lenses? I think also understanding that unless you are, but I don't see this, unless your people have got time carved out for all of this project stuff, they've still got a full-time job that you're probably still expecting full-time performance, and you're still expecting KPIs and everything to be hit. So I think you need to consider what you're doing and what you're putting in on top of what they are already doing. And remember that we have lives, we have stuff going on outside of work, there'll be things that will be going on. So I think not losing sight of that. I think sometimes considering that sometimes less is more, and that's where, if you know your non-negotiables and you know what are the real things that you're trying to drive to get to, is about prioritizing those things to make sure that you get to there successfully, and then you can start to bring in other stuff. But don't try and do everything at once, I think would be my steer on that, because ultimately, if you don't get the adoption, change is nothing. You can spend all of the money in the world on services and technology, but if you don't get your people and your customers on side with what it is that you're doing, it's a completely wasted effort. So you can go as fast as you want because that's what your budget says, or that's what you want to do. But if you're not going to get the adoption because you're just rushing it too much, then it's a wasted effort anyway. So I think when you're planning a change and you're doing your business case, you need to consider, actually, when we look at options, we always look at the option of do nothing, do something, do everything. I would almost do that on a timescale thing as well. Do quickly, do a medium pace, or do slowly, and understand actually what does that ROI look like on those different scales of the spectrum on delivery as well, so that you are able to kind of not overwhelm everybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's super important, isn't it? I mean, how, if you reflect back on operational implementation plans, how much of that plan is actually spent on the adoption piece at the end of it? Because, as you've said, it's so often the Achilles heel of any implementation of tech or change. So I think if you reflect back on that plan and see a good chunk of it carved out for the adoption piece, then maybe that'll give you a little bit more comfort you're on the right track. Right, okay, so moving on to our final topic then. So we've made the change, we've adopted it, it's having the impact, everyone's on board. But how do we ensure that we continue to evolve? Because of course, when we change processes and we adopt to new technologies, inevitably that cycle goes back round and there's a danger that it becomes obsolete again. And this is obviously a continuous process that we're in. So how do you avoid investing in a solution that might become obsolete in 12 months? And of course, that's becoming more and more of a concern for businesses with the pace of change driven by AI.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to my earlier point. Understanding and doing your research around how the suppliers that you're looking at, how they're innovating, how they're moving, how they're adapting, what do they think is going to happen in the market? And that's certainly an exercise that we did when I was working with NHS professionals after the pandemic. We were looking and understanding what was going to go on in the market, who were the people that were trying to drive innovation, where did people expect things to go, and understanding your customer requirements as well. What do we think that's going to evolve? I mean, we look at yourself as a person. What do you put up with as a good and a bad experience? I always do that with all of my customers. In user experience, what do I accept, what do I not accept, and what do I have as a good experience versus not a good experience? Amazon's always good because it pretty much turns up on time when I need it. Insurance companies are always a nightmare to deal with for me, and I might be stereotyping based on my insurance company, but if you can understand some of those things, then you can understand actually what do I think is going to happen with what I'm going to expect in the future as well. So I think it's that. I think making sure that the supplier is willing to grow with you, so that they aren't going to stay stagnant or anything like that. You don't want people that are going to sit still. You want people to be constantly have that hunger to grow and have that hunger to be innovative in the future. And then also just making sure as a team that you're in a continuous improvement cycle. So don't stand still. And that's why we were doing this topic today. So navigating quieter times. We know that it's a bit quieter at the moment. This is an ideal time to be looking at what you could be doing differently. There's never going to be a better time. When we know when the market picks back up, everybody's just going to be like, we're just frantically busy. Use this time. What do we think the future is going to be? How can you pivot with your clients? How can you offer something that is going to be what they're going to expect in the future? And I think if you can have that in mind, then you'll absolutely be set to stand forward. But I would have those conversations with any supplier I was working with. Look, this is the type of the framework we want to hold you to account, that you'll be constantly evolving your tech or constantly evolving your service, that you've got a roadmap that's going to move forward that we can input into. So you want to be able to share feedback and help shape some of that roadmap as well. You're investing in their technology or their supplier service, so you should be able to have a say in that. So yeah, that's the kind of approaches I'll take for that.
Yeah, no, great. And as you say, how many times have we sat here in business wanting to make a change and gone, we can't, we're just too busy. There's this BAU just coming at us from all angles. And like you say, that's the whole purpose of this event, is to actually think, well, if things are slightly quieter, which we're all hearing and feeling, then absolutely taking the opportunity now to do this dive and reassess or get those projects that you wanted to get done, but do it in a way where the change is directed in the right place, and also it's adopted and it embeds into the business. So any businesses today that are listening who haven't yet engaged with artificial intelligence, how should businesses be thinking around that in relation to their operations? I know, showing a little bit from our perspective at Giant, we are certainly keeping our eye on it, but there's been some reticence in the business to go all in, so to speak, because of the pace of change. If we look at adopting something now, is that going to be obsolete in 6 months? Yeah. So do you wait and see? But how long do you wait? It's a really tricky balance to get right.
Yeah, and it's the thing that everybody's talking about at the moment, isn't it? You can't avoid any conversation without it getting back to this. So it is the thing that everyone's talking about. It's not a trend. It's going to be here, and it's going to evolve, and it's going to stay. I think remember, it's a tool that can add value by automating repeatable tasks. So looking at what in your business can you do that doesn't need a human touch or element to it, that can be through the automation. And that's certainly something that we're constantly looking at in my business, that I'm not spending my time on stuff that doesn't warrant me to be doing. So actually, where can we leverage technology from that perspective? But I would also say start small. Learn, and because there's a whole learning and education piece that we all need to go through, and actually sometimes the best way to learn is to just try and see how it works and test it out with a couple of things, but start small, identify your low hanging fruit, evolve, learn your mistakes. So always my favorite thing is to fail fast, learn quick. So if something's not working, cut your losses from it, then make sure that you've taken the learning and go and do something else. But it is moving at such a pace, and I think I don't think anybody can afford not to get on board with it, because I think you will get left behind. But I think it's about finding what's right for you. And I was at another event on a panel a couple of weeks ago where there were some people that were saying, actually, we want to be the leaders. And that's fine. They want to be the leaders. They want to take the risks. They want to learn the lessons. They want to do that sort of things. You got to decide where you are in that process. Are you going to be the leaders? Are you going to be the people that are going to be just behind the leaders, or are you going to be the followers? And I think you can only make that decision based on your business and where you're at. But I think if you're looking at your business as a whole as well, and considering actually what does the future look like for you, how could you pivot for your clients, how could you respond? I think, that whole pandemic moment for me really kind of said, we all used to talk about business continuity planning and things like that, but actually it was a bit more of a tick box exercise for people. But actually, if overnight something happens and you need to massively pivot as your business, what could that look like to keep people employed? I think we should be constantly asking ourselves that question.
Yeah, absolutely. 21 days to get whatever it was, 20,000 people mobilised. Like it definitely would focus the mind, but let's not wish for another pandemic. We should just take that attitude into day to day where we can. Obviously, it's coming towards the end of the session now, but from a recruitment business perspective, are there any obvious places that they should be looking at from that AI where there might be some quick wins for them?
Yeah, so I think you got your obviously your screen, and I think loads of people are seeing that in AI is happening, and I think that a lot of the technologies are leveraging that at the moment. I think also the predictions of trends, so what's happening in the hiring trends, what are people looking for, all of that side of things, and then also I don't know about you, but outreach. Constantly I'm being approached about how you can automate outreach and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm sure that in the recruitment industry that could be quite a popular need if you've got several thousands of people on your database, and actually how do you categorize them and then get some automated outreaches going out to them. That could be quite a good one as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good shout. I mean, a slight shameless plug for Giant here, but certainly on the screening side of it and the AI piece, that's where we're heavily looking at our tech platform and getting the efficiency out of it to speed things up. And it's just amazing the pace of change that drives.
Well, you remember I used to work for Security Watchdog a number of years ago. So I used to do screening back in the day. And it was laborious and time consuming having to chase things. So yeah, if we can get AI doing some of that sort of stuff so that actually that process just becomes seamless, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, literally just sat next to someone watching how many times they click a button is just a good way to actually start focusing through. You get your automation wins quite quickly, and then you can start moving into some of the cleverer stuff. So that brings us to an end of the sort of formal session. Just a quick reminder, if anyone's got any questions, then please do submit them. We've got a couple to pick up here, but feel free to send them through and I'll pass them back to Leah. Let's get straight into it, Leah, then. We'll go with our questions that we've got here. It's quite a long one, so just bear with me a second. So in the context of commercial arrangements or agreements, could you share your experiences with imposing penalties on vendors who fail to adhere to the T's and C's of the contract? While I believe that enforcing financial penalties should always be considered, could you discuss any potential risks, implications, or relevant insights? I mean, that's a great question. We often see things like service credits within contracts, but what's your view on taking the contract and then actually applying it to a real life scenario, and whether that's a good or a bad thing for people to consider?
Yes, I'm not a contract expert, so I'm just going to put that one out there first. But what I would say is in getting your legal teams and procurement teams to do your contracts, you should absolutely make sure that there is skin in the game. Yeah, so especially where there are things like time and materials and all of that sort of stuff, you need to make sure that you're going to get something for the money that you're spending. We all have heard horror stories where you spend a lot of money and actually you've got nothing for that money that you've spent. So I think it's about having that grown-up conversation with the supplier that, look, you know, we're in this for the long haul. We want to work with a partner, and we want to approach this in a relationship that actually, if we both win, we both win. But actually, if it doesn't go right, that's on us both. And I think it's about having that agreement and that kind of contract going in. And then if those penalties do need to be imposed, that's an easier thing because you've got into it eyes open, and actually you've been really transparent that that's going to be the approach. So I think it's just about doing that and being honest. And don't get me wrong, you'll have some people that will select themselves out because of that approach, because they won't want to take the risk, and that's fine if that's where they want to be. But at least you know where you are then, from a person that's looking to work with a supplier.
Yeah, no, fantastic, and that's obviously echoes the themes that you were going through in the chat earlier there. Like, it's just all about how you position that with the supplier, isn't it? If you're going to think about putting those penalties in, then have the open dialogue so the supplier understands the why. It probably may stem from a previous historical bad experience that someone's had, and the supplier will be keen to understand that context, so they understand where the change is coming from. So that makes complete sense. We've got a good one here that's come through. If you could go back and do one thing differently on a change project, what would it be? So there's probably I don't hesitate to say there might be a couple to think of there. Let's not mention the client, but anything that you would change in hindsight on any of those projects.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think my biggest thing, because I think people are so fundamental to change, is don't take what people say on base value. So I think that's the biggest thing that will untangle you on a change program or a project, is that somebody will say something and you just take it for what it is, but actually you've not understood what's driven what they've said. And we see that in quite a lot of organizations, especially kind of your medium to larger organizations, where there's different things at play. There's different scenarios that people are working through, and they're saying something not necessarily for the right of the project, but they're saying something that benefits them in a wider context. So I think that would probably be my bigger thing, is just be really, really aware of the environment in which you're in, and understanding that, because I think, that can come back to bite you.
Yeah, I'm smiling. How many times has that happened? You get told one thing, it turns out to be something else, or it's political and it's to fulfill someone's agenda, and then you start getting to the heart of the matter, but you're already into the project, and it's like, okay, wish we'd have known this from the start. That's really, that's just really tricky, but it just probably goes back to questioning and speaking to a broader pool of people to understand all the various factors that are involved in that.
And I think the other thing, which controversially, I don't think enough people frame it in this way. I'm not here to deliver a project. I'm here to deliver an outcome. Now, this project might not be the thing that delivers that outcome. So if there's something wrong with this project, tell me, help me, make me understand, show me, because actually for me it's about the outcome. And this is where my thinking is a bit different to probably other people that work in my industry, because actually they're the project manager and they fight tooth and nail for that project. Don't fight for the outcome, because then actually if the project is what you're trying to deliver is not the right thing, then you'll stop that. And I think that's where you'll probably have those better relationships that are a bit more transparent with your stakeholders as well, if it's about the outcome.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point to end on. I love to end on a controversial one, but I think it makes complete sense, doesn't it? If someone's brought in to deliver a project, that becomes their baby, and they become really wedded to the thing as opposed to the outcome. It's the outcome that's going to get everyone on the bus with you and take people on the journey. So I think that's a great point to finish on. Leah, thanks so much for your time today. Apologies for the fraught start, but we got there in the end, and it just went to prove a couple of the comments that we made there. Make sure that you take
a couple of live examples. So
exactly, yeah. And thanks to the audience as well. You've been great, and thanks for your questions that have come through. We really appreciate you joining us today. We will be planning at Giant to run a number of other webinars. We are suspecting there could be some news shortly on the umbrella consultation or some updates, so we'll make sure that we get one of those booked in super quick. Probably take a little bit of a break across the summer, and then coming back into September time, we'll get going again on the series. So please do keep your eye out for those invites. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Leah, and we hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.